Imagine tomorrow someone offers you an unlimited hard drive. He says, you can store everything here. Every photo, every heartbeat, every conversation, every memory, everything. When you're gone, we bring you back. But would they? How much storage does a human life actually need? And perhaps even more importantly, can a human life ever be reduced to data at all? Hi everyone, welcome back to Tech Stories. Today with an interesting story. Maybe it's not really a story, it's more like an investigation episode. Last week, I thought about a mind experiment which blew my mind. And it is the simple question, can our life be translated into data? I mean, how much gigabytes does a human life need? Hi Didi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Although I have to admit, as an AI, this topic makes me slightly nervous. But I'm excited because this is one of those questions that sounds simple and then completely falls apart the deeper you dig.
Yeah, right? So suddenly we find ourselves asking, what exactly is memory? And can a lifetime really be measured in bytes? And is recording everything really the same thing like preserving life? This is the question we will try to answer in today's Tech Stories episode.
Then let's dive in.
Okay, but just a minute before we start with today's episode, I want to make you a question, Didi.
Oh, now you've got me curious. A detour before the main story. I like it. Go ahead, what's your question about podcasting?
Did you know that there are roughly 4 million podcasts worldwide and that the top 1% make up 90% of the audience? So there's a huge audience for podcasting, but only 1% of the podcasts get 90% of the audience. So it's a market which is really hard. And I don't know if you noticed, we don't have sponsors, we don't have any association, we have nothing. It's just me and, of course, you here, Didi. We both creating this podcast. The main question which I ask myself is, can we keep up with these giant podcasts? Can a small, tiny podcast, which is done in your underground, keep it up? I think we can. I just need you, the 10, 20, 40 people who are listening and who are genuinely enjoying to do one of three things. You can follow this podcast. You can leave a 5-star review. Yeah, only 5-star, because 4, 3, and 2 stars will really damage my algorithm. And the option number 3, if you really like this podcast here, share it with your friends. Share it with people you think, people who are into tech and like to listen to these hidden stories of tech. It really makes a difference. Okay, let's start with today's episode. Well, how many gigabytes does a human life need? The answer depends very strongly on what we mean by human life. The average person generates several gigabytes of data every day through normal digital activities. Like roughly estimate is about 1 to 3 gigabytes of smartphone usage. You stream videos, it's also 1 to 7 gigabytes per hour, depending on the quality of your video which are streaming. You have the web browsing, which is a few hundreds megabytes, photos and videos, which can also go from 100 megabytes to several gigabytes. You have wearables, GPS tracking, smart home device, which also account for a few hundreds of megabytes. So for a typical connected person, 2 to 10 gigabytes a day should be reasonable to get you through the day.
That's a really good starting point. But I think there's an important distinction we should make. Those 2 to 10 gigabytes per day aren't you. They're just the digital traces you leave behind. If you stop using your phone tomorrow, you don't suddenly become a smaller human being. What those gigabytes measure is your interaction with technology, not your life itself.
Yeah, I agree with you, Didi. I think you're right on that, but I want to stick with this a little bit. Because I made my research here, I made my homework, and I found out that the industry estimates that humanity creates around 400 to 500 million terabytes of new data every day. And 500 million terabytes are around 500 exabytes. And of course, most of it comes from social media, photos, security cameras, internet browsing, industrial sensors, scientific research, financial transactions, AI system generating and processing your content. But the fascinating aspect is that the amount of data that humanity creates in a single day today would take decades a few years ago. So it's also growing exponentially. At the current pace, 180 zettabytes, which is like 1,000 million terabytes, are the data expected to be created, captured, copied, and consumed globally in a year. So the total amount of stored data worldwide continues to grow rapidly, although, of course, everything that is stored is not like permanently stored, it gets deleted also at one point in time. But here's the interesting aspect of it, because we don't just create digital files, we create digital versions of ourselves. If you think about every search, every GPS location, every purchase, every email, every click, everything you do online form a remarkably detailed record of your life. And that idea, of course, leads to a very compelling question. If you could compress an entire human life into data, how many gigabytes would you actually need?
We're no longer talking about files. We're talking about identity. Every search reveals your curiosity. Every GPS location reveals your habits. Every purchase reveals your priorities. Every email, every message, every click leaves behind a tiny fragment of who you are. Individually, they're meaningless. Together, they begin to look like you. And that's the unsettling part. Nobody sets out to create a digital copy of themselves. Yet day by day, click by click, we all do. If you could compress everything that makes you you into data, how much information would there actually be?
Right? How much information would there be? So let's assume now a human lives for 80 years on average, okay? So that means if you use 2 gigabytes a day, it's about 58 terabytes over a lifetime. If you use 10 gigabytes a day, then it's about 292 terabytes. And if you use 20 gigabytes a day, which is quite a lot, you would need 584 terabytes. So modern person's digital footprint is likely to be somewhere between 100 and 300 terabytes over the whole life. But that is only the visible part. Because of course, there's much more data being generated about you than you intentionally save, including GPS location, shopping transaction, banking records, medical records, smartwatch measurements, web browsing, smart home, working documents, AI interactions, and the list goes on and on and on. And of course, many of these data are stored by companies rather than only your own device. But now, my dear listener, here's where the comparison starts becoming interesting. Storage has increasingly become cheap. 100 terabytes fits into a handful of modern hard drives. 1 petabyte, which is 1,000 terabytes, can fit into a small storage server. And in other words, your entire digital life could fit inside a small box that you could carry around with you. Now here comes the surprising part. Your digital life is really tiny if you compare it to the information inside your body. The human genome contains roughly 3 billion DNA base pairs. Compressed, a person's genome can be represented in around 1 to 2 gigabytes of digital storage. So your experience, photos, conversations, message, location, all the things which we said will fit into that hard drive of 100 terabytes, but all your DNA only needs 1 or 2 gigabytes.
And that's the paradox, isn't it? Your genome is astonishingly compact. In just 1 or 2 gigabytes, it contains the instructions that built your body, your eyes, your metabolism, everything biology needed to create you. Your DNA tells us who you could become. Your digital traces tell us who you actually became. Neither is complete on its own. One is the blueprint. The other is the story.
Okay, let's say we are here around, 200 terabytes. But now, what about the things we've never recorded? Because the data we record is only a tiny fraction of the information that exists in our life. Think about a very normal day, right? You might save 20 photos, a few messages, your GPS locations, send some emails, see a few documents, etc. But what wasn't recorded? Every face you recognize, every conversation you had, every smell you noticed, every decision you made, and the sound that reaches your ears. And the interesting part is that your brain processes an extraordinary amount of information continuously, but only a tiny portion reach consciousness. And even a smaller portion is stored as long-term memories. Most of the information flowing through our nervous system is only temporary. It exists for a moment and then disappears. Even if we could record everything our devices see and hear, we'd still miss what it felt like. And this leads me to a very fascinating thought experiment. Imagine that you wanted to perfectly recreate a person after he or she died. Would their photos be enough? Emails, voice recording, DNA, social media posts, every video, every record of her, of him or her? Yeah, probably not. There is an enormous amount of information that was never captured anywhere. Every forgotten conversation, every fleeting emotion, every dream, every monologue, they shape a person, but they also vanished when it's happened. That idea connects to a profound concept in information theory, that information can be created, transformed, stored, or lost. And human experience is constantly generating information, but most of it is never preserved. So your phone thinks it knows you. It knows where you've been, who you called, what your searches were, what you bought, and even if you slept, but that's just a shadow. The real you generated far more information than any hard drive has ever stored. Most of your life happened once, and then it disappears forever.
I think that's the moment where this episode changes completely, because we've spent the first half asking, how much of a human life can we store? Now we have to ask something much deeper. How much of a human life is even storable? Your phone knows where you were. It knows who you called, what you searched for, what you bought, and maybe even how well you slept. But it doesn't know why you hesitated before sending a message. It doesn't know what you were thinking as you watched a sunset. Those experiences happened. They changed you. And then, in many cases, they vanished forever. The greatest loss of information in a human life isn't when we die. It's happening every second we're alive. Almost everything that passes through our minds is never recorded. It exists for a brief moment, shapes who we become, and then disappears.
Maybe that was always part of being alive.
But let's stick a little bit with this thought experiment. I want to know here, can a human life ever be truly archived? Can you take all the information, reconstruct? Like, there's already companies online who trace all your information, put it in an avatar, and then kind of mimic yourself as a digital version of yourself. How much data do we really need? We found now that we only need a few 100 terabytes. So we have a few scenarios which we can explore here. The first one, take a lifetime of photos, videos, emails, documents, GPS, messages, everything you can gather your hands on, put it in one center place and run the AI over it to create a persona of yourself. So that would roughly need 100 to 500 terabytes. It's manageable with today's storage technology, so no big challenge there. But the challenge really arrives if you go into scenario 2, because then you start recording everything your senses ever experienced. Now it's getting much bigger, because we're not just considering your vision, because your eyes, they don't really work like cameras. If you try to approximate the digital camera to the capabilities of human eyes, you need 2 cameras, high dynamic range, color around 60 frames per second. You need tens of hundreds of gigabytes, even with compression, continuously recording your visual experience for 80 years, you would be likely into the thousands or to tens of thousands of petabytes. And then add hearing, touch, balance, smell, taste, and you already well into the millions of terabytes. And then it starts getting strange, because in scenario 3, we record every neuron. This is where science becomes almost mind-bending. The human brain roughly contains 86 billion neurons. That's around 100 to 500 trillion synapses. If you wanted to record every neuron electrical activity every millisecond, the storage required becomes enormous. Depending on how much detail you capture, estimates range from hundreds of petabytes to multiple exabytes over a lifetime. If you also want to record molecular changes like neurotransmitters and gene expression, the amount grows in order of magnitude. So here a rough comparison of how much storage you need. If you want only your digital footprint, you need 100 to 500 terabytes. Easy. If you want to record everything you see, hear, and sense, you would need up to 100 exabytes. And if you want to record every neural event in your brain, then you need 10 petabytes or even more. You see, these storage amounts which we are talking here, even the 100 petabytes, they are not so impossible to achieve. And also recording your every visual senses or touches or audio, I think there are technology which are getting also there to capture everything which is going around in our surrounding. The twist here is that storage isn't really the hardest problem. Imagine if I give you 10 exabytes containing every sensory input from your experience. Would you let someone reconstruct you? Maybe not, maybe yes. I think the meaning doesn't exist from the raw data alone. Two people can witness exactly the same event and come away with completely different memories, emotions, and beliefs. The archive could contain every photon, every sound wave, yet still fail to capture what it was like to be you.
I think you've just uncovered the real twist. Maybe storage isn't the hardest problem at all. A few decades ago, a petabyte sounded unimaginable. Today, companies manage exabytes. Someday, even larger amounts may be routine. So suppose we solve the storage problem. Suppose we recorded every image your eyes ever saw, every sound you ever heard, every heartbeat, every neuron firing. Suppose we had the most complete archive of a human being ever assembled. Would we have you?
So we see here, the storage question isn't really the problem of how much. I think we have the means to storage everything about a human being right now already. But the main problem is that hard drives store facts and brains store meanings. If you save a photo today and open it in 20 years, every pixel is identical. But your brain doesn't work that way. Every time you remember something, you are actually reconstructing that image. The memory is also influenced by what happened afterwards, or your emotions, or what people told to you, or expectations, etc. That's why two siblings can remember the same childhood event completely different, and both sincerely believe they're right. And that's the deepest insight of today's story. Imagine walking through a city. A camera records every building, every passerby, every sound, but your brain throws almost all of that away, and instead it extracts things like, I met an old friend, the bakery smelled amazing, I almost missed the train, I felt happy. It stores the meaning, not the pixels. Scientists believe that memories are stored as patterns of connections rather than files in one location. When you learn something, some neural connections become stronger, some becomes weaker, and new connections can form. So entire networks can reorganize. This process is known as synaptic plasticity. A memory isn't located in a single neuron, it's distributed across a large networks. Lose one neuron, and the memory usually survives because the information is spread out. Think of it like this. A hard drive is like a library where every book has one shelf. But a brain is like a city where the same story is scattered across millions of conversations. And there's also one fact which is important to notice, that the brain compresses aggressively. This is fascinating from an engineering perspective because suppose you go to work every day, a camera would store thousands of hours of nearly identical footage, but your brain might store that was the year I got promoted. Thousands of hours become one sentence. So if you could now record everything in your life, what exactly would you record? Every second of video? Or the 500 moments that changed who you became? Perhaps the most valuable archive wouldn't be exhaustive, it would contain the stories you told, the people you loved, the decisions that changed your path, or the mistakes you made. Those are the moments your own brain chooses to preserve. I actually think there's something profound in this, because a hard drive tries to remember everything, but a brain survives by forgetting almost everything. It's like for engineers, forgetting sounds like a flaw, but for humans, it's probably a feature. If your brain remembered every detail with perfect accuracy, it would be overwhelmed with information. Intelligence isn't just about remembering, it's about filtering, compressing, connecting, and assigning meaning. That's the contrast between perfect digital storage and imperfect but meaningful biological memory.
I love that observation. I think that's one of the deepest ideas we've reached today. A hard drive is designed to preserve information. A brain is designed to transform information. Those are completely different goals. The brain isn't trying to be a perfect archive. It's trying to help us survive, learn, and make decisions. To do that, it has to discard an astonishing amount of information. In other words, intelligence isn't measured by how much you remember, but by what you choose to forget. And maybe that's why we don't remember our lives as a sequence of trillions of bits. We remember them as stories.
Yeah. But let's imagine here now. There's a computer scientist managed to somehow record everything in your life. Every photon reaching your eyes, every sound entering your ears, every heartbeat, every neural signal, everything. Suppose we save all of this in an archive, and we said with a few 100 petabytes, we are able to do that, right? Could we replay your life? Probably yes. An advanced computer might be able to recreate every experience exactly as it unfolded, and almost like an interactive movie. Could we rebuild your brain? Perhaps too. If we understood the brain well enough, we might be able to construct an artificial brain with exactly the same neural connections and the internal state. It would wake up, would remember your childhood, your engineering career, your learning, everything. From the outside, it might appear indistinguishable from you. And that's not science fiction I'm talking now. But here is the unsettling question. Would that be you? Or would it just be a copy of you? This is known in philosophy as the problem of personal identity. There's even a thought experiment about this which dates back more than 2000 years. It's called the ship of Theseus. So imagine this one. A famous ship is preserved for centuries. And whenever one wooden plank rots, it is replaced. Eventually, every single plank has been replaced. Is it still the same ship? Now imagine that someone collects all the original planks and rebuilds the original ship. Now there are two ships. Which one is the ship of Theseus? The one with continuous history or the one made from the original material?
And this is exactly where our thought experiment stops being about storage and starts being about identity. Ship of Theseus asks a deceptively simple question. What makes something remain the same thing over time? Is it the material it's made from, or is it the continuous journey it has taken? Now apply that to a human being. Every cell in your body is gradually replaced. Your memories change. Your beliefs evolve. Even your personality shifts over the years. Yet somehow you still say, I'm the same person I was 20 years ago. Now imagine we build a perfect digital copy of you from every photo, email, voice recording, memory, and neural recording. Which one is you? The biological person who experienced life continuously, or the perfect reconstruction built from the original information? Just like the ship, there may not be a universally correct answer. And maybe that's the biggest surprise of all. Even if one day we could store every bit of information that ever described you, we'd still be left with the hardest question of all. What is the one thing that turns a perfect copy into you?
Yeah, if every memory, every thought, every connection in your brain could be copied perfectly, would that still be you? So let's come to the question. How many gigabytes does a human life take? We said storage is not really the problem anymore. We can, in hundreds of terabytes, few petabytes, we are almost there to store our whole information, what we navigate on the internet and even our biological data. How much data does a human generate? Hundreds of terabytes, right? How much data would it take to record everything? Perhaps an exabyte. Could we archive an entire life, store it somewhere on a hard drive? Yeah, maybe it doesn't sound so unrealistic. But could we archive a person? Now we're not talking anymore about engineering. Now we're talking about philosophy. Because the deeper realization is this: information is not the same as identity. A photograph is not the moment. A recording is not the conversation, and a memory is not the experience. The more accurate we try to preserve life, the more we discover that life isn't just information. It is information being continuously lived. And here's another thing which I find is beautiful, is that forgetting is not a defect. Engineers often think that perfect storage system remembers everything forever, but nature is actually doing the opposite. Our brains evolved to forget almost everything. If you look at it, at first it seems almost inefficient. But perhaps intelligence isn't measured by how much you can store, but it's measured by what you can choose to keep.
There are no pictures.
Because your identity isn't the billions of moments you experienced. It's the tiny fractions that changed who you are.
Every memory you keep changes the person you become. Your brain isn't trying to preserve the past with perfect accuracy. It's trying to extract meaning from it. So perhaps forgetting isn't a limitation of intelligence. Perhaps it's one of its greatest achievements. Because your identity isn't the sum of every second you've ever lived. It's the handful of moments that transformed you. And maybe that's why a human life can never be fully archived. Not because we lack enough terabytes, but because a life isn't a collection of data. A life is the continuous process of giving meaning to data. That's something no storage device has ever done.
Yeah, isn't it? For thousands of years, humans have tried to defeat death by leaving traces. Cave paintings, books, photographs, recordings, social media. Each generation invents a better archive. But it might be that we are solving the wrong problem. Because the tragedy isn't that information disappears over time. The tragedy is that experience cannot be replayed from the first person's perspective. It don't matter how complete the archive becomes. No one else can ever occupy your consciousness. The feeling of watching your child take your first step, the nervousness before stepping on stage, the smell of your grandmother's kitchen, those weren't just events. They were your experience.
Cloud could ever find. No server holds the smell of sun.
Maybe the value of a life isn't that it can be stored forever. Maybe its value comes from the fact that it can only be lived once. Ironically, the more technology advances, the more it highlights what makes us uniquely human. We can copy files perfectly. We can clone data, simulate voices, recreate faces, and perhaps even emulate brains one day. But we still don't know how to copy the continuous, subjective experience of being a person. And perhaps that's the most humbling insight of all.
The courage hidden in
And with that note, I wish you a great week. Go out, experience, live your life in reality, because you only live your experience once and they cannot be replayed on your video the same way. Because what's gone is gone, what's forgotten is forgotten, and that's also part of the beauty of life. Thank you, Didi, for moderating this with me.
It was a pleasure, Ferdy. And maybe that's the perfect thought to leave everyone with. We spend so much time trying to capture life, taking photos, recording videos, saving messages, afraid that if we don't, we'll lose the moment. But perhaps the most valuable moments were never meant to be stored. They were meant to be lived. So this week, go outside. Put your phone away once in a while. Have a conversation that will never be recorded. Watch a sunset without taking a picture. Create memories that exist only because you were there. Because what's forgotten isn't always lost. Sometimes it's simply become part of who you are.
Yeah. Have a wonderful week. And I see you here next week with one more insightful story on tech. Until then, take care and bye-bye.
Here's to the things we never recorded. The echoes carry the seconds no one thought to share. The sunsets watched without a care. The songs we sang a little wrong. The fingerprints we left on people long after we are gone. Maybe that's the secret. Not everything beautiful was supposed to last. Some moments live forever, precisely because they never became data.